Welcome back to the Happiest Sad Person podcast. I'm Alessandra, your somewhat anxious host this week. I hope all of your weeks have been well. I'm feeling a little bit anxious because I am still on the hunt for some new work. And though I feel that everything will work itself out in the end and that everything will be okay, be it delusional confidence or trust that there's some structure to the chaos of the universe. I don't know. But I do always have this feeling that everything will work out. It doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy ride or a comfortable ride, but it'll pan itself out in the way that it should. And for me, every time I sort of know that I'm doing all that I can and that I try to put out good karma into the world and, all that woo-woo stuff, life takes care of me because I sort of have almost like prepaid into the system and prepaid some debts is kind of sometimes how I look at it. So that's why I'm feeling a little bit anxious. And, when you hit a bottom in your life, you kind of have that aha moment where you're like, oh, yeah, this is kind of trash. But it's kind of how I felt about COVID as well, where it took me like over 6 months to even like register like, oh, this is bad. Like it didn't hit me. It was like a delayed reaction. But also weirdly, again, a happy week. I've been busier than I have been in a long time. I have gotten more done. Granted, am I working a new gig that I've found? No, but am I doing things and creative works that inspire me? Yes. So I still count it as a win because I'm still moving forward. And recently I've been thinking about how with this podcast, even though most people in my life don't know about it and I've sort of covertly marketed it, or, if whoever's come across it has just been natural, organic discovering. Most people in my life, I don't promote on my regular Instagram. It's not a secret, but it's just I wanted to prove that this was something I could do on my own and that I didn't have any outside influence, and it just weirdly feels like a little cloistered world that's my own. But at the same time, talking about my goals and ambitions and my problems and making them all public, it's scary. And especially when you try to commit to things, for me, I've been making promises to myself in public via this podcast, via, the Instagram for the podcast, talking about my running goals, my writing goals, trying to do challenges and lose weight. Doing all of these things in a public forum is scary because what you're doing is making promises to yourself. And it's one thing when you fail just with yourself or with the people in your life, but it's a different thing when you fail in public and there's now a linear record of it. And I'm not saying this to say I'm necessarily failing at anything, but I'm certainly aware that I have now more of a I respect everyone that's listening, but it's not really a diligence to an audience per se yet, or I'm not getting, that feedback where it's like I'm, for lack of a better term, inspiring people to do anything, but I have more of a diligence to myself, a duty to myself to show up because there's now this clear record of what I've been doing and what I've been kind of holding myself to. And I forget why I initially thought of this, but I have been thinking about it a lot, and I've recently wanted to try, because I have a lot of things I'm working on at the moment, especially when it comes to like physical health and working out and training, and it's all been working. It's all been going very well. Like, I've now migrated from doing barbell bicep curls to build arm strength, and I've been doing that for about, I don't know, now at least 4 weeks, maybe 5. Now I'm migrating to baby push-ups. Anytime I think of, oh, I should do push-ups, I do a set of 5 for what most people would call girl push-ups. And for me, they are still embarrassingly challenging. Like, I am truly embarrassed about my lack of strength, like my noodle arms. And I don't know, I need to build up more and more strength in my arms. I feel like they're getting stronger, but I have a long, long way to go. But on the note of doing all these physical challenges, I've thought about doing another, or like a hodgepodging, creating my own version of 75 hard. I've done this year, I've done 2 rounds of 75 hard, completed them successfully. They worked out well. I've lost 20 pounds and kept it off. So I like the idea of 75 hard. And to finish off the year, you have to wait in between and then do, before the year ends, a final 75 hard that I think it's called phase 3, where they add more challenges. But that doesn't start until September. So part of me is like, do I want to kind of create my own 75 mid for myself in the meantime and kind of create my own list of goals? I have a tentative list, kind of like a summer challenge. Part of me wants to do that. So let me know if you are down to follow that. I could maybe do some TikToks and some reels about it, and maybe even do a dedicated video, but I'm kind of already doing it anyway. It would be more so just having a tangible structure and then labeling it as something. So it's really, what I'm doing takes effort, but it's really not that much more work. And another sort of thing that inspired this thought, that I'm like, oh, maybe I need some sort of like tangible challenge or something else in my life that makes me feel like I have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Especially because my life feels so luxuriously open right now, but without the luxury. You know, I'm not an Impressionist painting of wealthy people just lying on the grass. You know, the epitome of leisure and sort of the creation of the wealthy ruling class and their experience of leisure. I am not that at all. So it's a luxuriousness. It's luxuriating, but in like poverty. So I have this time and I have this desire to feel like I'm completing something. Because I've always loved school and I miss school. So the thing that inspired this was finishing David Goggins' book. Can't Hurt Me is what I believe it's called, and it's his first book. And he is a Navy SEAL, an ultra runner. He did a crazy pull-up challenge where I think he did, 4,020 pull-ups. He is the shirtless black dude that yells while he runs, if you've ever seen those TikToks or videos anywhere. He is inspiring. He's what I call bro motivation. He yells at you. He's intense. He swears, but I love it. I love that kind of brutal, brute force, but still with like a core of empathy, because like deep down, he's a really good dude. He talks about in his book so much about being a good leader and making sure to kind of like humble yourself whenever you are not being the best example for other people, and the importance of camaraderie and community. And, you know, he started from ground zero. He was, you know, like nearly 300 pounds, if 300 pounds, spraying for bugs at fast food restaurants and had no prospects. And he lost a ton of weight, joined the military, and changed his life. And the beginning of his life, you have to read the book, but it was really not good. And he had everything stacked up against him, but he persevered. And not many people can come from that perspective, because a lot of people that give advice or self-help people are people that already come from some level of privilege or a certain baseline of fitness, or comes from a hypothetical or theoretical way of talking about an issue. And you can maybe get something out of it, but you're not getting that person saying, I did all of these things, I came through to the other side. And it just shows how rare his situation was that he ended up surviving. Because on paper, you absolutely would have read, you know, his CV, his resume for his life and said, oh, no way he's going to be anywhere. And yet, you know, it's probably one of Joe Rogan's most popular interviews is one of the first videos he does with David Goggins. You know, he's done speeches. He's everywhere on social media. If you haven't heard of him, I highly recommend looking him up. But reading his book and having him talk about going through Navy SEALs, BUDS, which is like Hell Week. He did that 3 times. He went to Army Ranger School. He learned how to put out wildfires in Montana. He went through all of these really like technical programs with like a certification and an ending, and he learned all of these, you know, map skills to get through, you know, really like dense topography. And I was like, oh, I miss having a program, a tangible thing, like school. And so I was like, I need to do a challenge. I need to do something. I need to feel like get the rush of really completing something challenging, of putting my work in, putting my time in, and, you know, like finishing a college class, finishing a program. It feels really rewarding at the end. And I like kind of following a syllabus, and, you know, it's like a map. For me, it's fun. And so I decided to do 2 different versions of kind of structured learning, because I've been trying to find a way to read the classics of literature for a while now, and I couldn't really find a way to, I don't know, do it in a way that didn't feel overwhelming, or I wanted to find a way to learn about it in a way where I could get feedback and like structured understanding of the texts, so that I am not just reading it, but I'm also getting the literary criticism behind it. And I'm really diving deep into the literature like I did when I was studying literature in college. Most of my focus was on American, like the American modern novel. And then also I did my thesis on Keats and existentialism. So I'm not too well versed in British or more ancient literature, or the true classics. So I decided to take a world literature class via Harvard X, which is Harvard's online programs that they offer. And I will get the exact name of the class. It is Masterpieces of World Literature. And if you go to the edX app, I'll have it linked below wherever you're listening to this. But the app is EDX, Education X, I'm assuming. I don't know what experience. I don't know what X involves. Maybe X just isn't online. But it's pretty interesting because it's a lot of books. It's a lot of things you would only read in a literature class. So it opens with, I believe you pronounce it Goethe. And so I got an anthology of those works. And then it goes into the Epic of Gilgamesh, Homer and the Odyssey, the 1001 Nights, the Tale of Genji, the Lusiads, Candide, Lu Sun and Eileen Chang. I don't know how to say this one either. I'm embarrassed. Bourgeois, and the Ficciones. I should know. I'm studying Italian at the moment as well. Death and the King's Horseman, Salman Rushdie, and Orhan Pamuk, which is another author I've wanted to read. And then it goes into a final chapter about world literature today. So it's a wide breadth of study, and this class expires in, I think, about 3 months at the end of August. So I have basically all summer to read these books and expand my understanding of world literature. I believe I've read parts of the Odyssey. And then I'm reading a Salman Rushdie book right now, The Satanic Verses. And I may have read maybe some literary criticism of Orhan Pamuk, but otherwise, these are all pretty new to me. I know their importance within literature and that they have a place in it, and they've been mentioned throughout my study of literature. But again, I didn't have a lot of true world literature studies. It was more in the context of more modern, postmodern, more philosophy-based world literature, or a focus in British literature. But then mostly it was American literature / poetry. So I really do want to delve deeper into understanding books, just like I'm trying to research film and study film. There's so much literature to read out there, and I want to continue being a lifelong learner for literature, because that's one of my true passions. And then my second challenge I'm doing when it comes to educational, kind of a tangible goal, and this is going to end up being a lifelong pursuit, because I was like, I want something that I can look at that's tangible, that says I did this thing, and that I can kind of keep giving myself little rewards along the way. Because David Goggins, throughout his book, he says that he keeps the good or impressive things he does for himself kind of in a mental lockbox that he calls the cookie jar, so that whenever he's struggling or in the midst of something, or to keep going in a ultra race, he opens the cookie jar and remembers something good that he did. It's kind of like remembering your wins. And I love the feeling of kind of a tangible cookie jar. And so I thought, how cool would it be? Because I love collecting books. I love book anthologies. I love old books. And there's a thing called the Harvard Classics, which is a collection of books, 50 volumes, I think, that Harvard put together and said these are the books. If you had to, I think the statement on it was, if you wanted civilizations beyond us or after us to remember this world, what books would be in that anthology? And so this is what this is what is being accomplished or attempted to be accomplished with having this variety of stories. And it's all sorts of things: poems, speeches, books, really interesting collection of writings throughout history. And so I want to read the volumes one by one by one by one, obviously starting with one. And so I purchased volume 1. They're all vintage copies. And I want to have, so each copy that I go through, I can, when I finish it, I'm going to annotate them and put it on my bookshelf. And then get the second copy, do the same thing. And kind of reference little things throughout. And I'll have, notes of if I want to use this in future writing, or if I like this quote, so I can annotate accordingly. But at the end, I'll have my full set of 50 books. They're all going to be different colors, different kinds, because there's a million different versions of these books, of different sets, different, what's the word I'm looking for? Not different kinds, different, I guess versions. But in the end, when I finish, probably a long time from now, because 50 volumes, and there are some heavy texts in there, some challenging reads, which I'm excited for. And it definitely is going to make me hit the classics. There's something about reading things that Harvard suggested that feels right. It feels good. I'm a sucker for a good syllabus. I'm a sucker for a good reading list. I love when an Ivy League college tells you this is what you should read. But I, at the end, will buy a basically full set of these books. The entire encyclopedic anthology of these books, and have it as the aesthetic representation, the tangible representation of what I completed. And obviously that version of those books will be unannotated. They will remain pristine. They will be a part of retaining the historical respect and significance of books. Probably, I'd want a version that's, at least 40 years old, 50 years old. So vintage quality set of books. So those are my two goals at the moment when it comes to almost like having a study program, being a lifelong learner. I'm excited for these, and it's going to make me feel that when I finish, especially the world literature class, because it's sooner, but it'll make me feel accomplished. It'll make me feel like, even though the time is passing and the summer's going to be up in the air with what happens with work and life and my book and all sorts of things, but I'll still have had something tangible that I did over the summer. And granted, is this going to get me college credit? No. Is this going to be for other people or for some? No, it's for me. It's simply to remind myself that I can do hard things. I can learn hard things. I can sit down and study and focus and retain knowledge and information, and also do something that I enjoy. But still, it's going to be a challenging thing reading these books and reading, I would say texts that are on the harder side. This isn't going to be, me rereading Harry Potter or something. It's, a challenge, but that's good. A challenge should be difficult. It should be just stimulating enough where it feels like you have to push yourself, but also not too challenging that it's above and beyond, because then you get discouraged. So I'm excited for that. I'm certainly going to be busy this summer. And then I also started listening to David and Goliath, which is an audiobook by Malcolm Gladwell, who I believe I would call him a social scientist. He has written a lot of books. They're all sort of about how people succeed, why people end up better off than others. I could be wrong, but I think he also wrote the book Outliers. I've seen a lot of his podcasts. It's funny. I can always hear his voice in my head whenever I hear his name. There's something about his voice. And I think he's Canadian, so it might be that twinge or twang to his voice that always makes it so distinct to me. So it's just funny. Every time I now hear his name, I'm like, oh, I can hear that voice in my head. But David and Goliath is so interesting. The book is obviously based in the lore of David and Goliath, the story in the Bible where Goliath is the giant and David is the shepherd boy, and he ends up winning the battle. And we always think, oh, they were met equally and he had some supernatural power on his side, meaning David, and he wins. David shockingly kills the giant, and away the victor goes, David, and is surprisingly the victor in this battle. Well, in actuality, and it's funny, I've always thought that story was it just seemed too good to be true, in a way. Like, we always want the underdog to win in this very pure sense, where they truly are able to outfight in the traditional sense, like physically outfight a larger person, when in reality they usually have to go about fighting in a different way. They have to use their particular brand of strength to win. And that was the case for a lot of people that kind of researched this Bible story and like kind of figured out what happened. And in reality, at that time, there were 3 kinds of ways to fight. You could fight hand-to-hand combat, you could fight on horseback, or you could be like an archer, or do like a sling where you'd almost like throw a stone, like the equivalent of an ancient gun, where it's just you using your manpower though to hurl a stone or some other type of object. And they think that David was a stone thrower, so he would have fought in that way. And Goliath most likely had acromegalia, which made him a giant, which made sense, because to me, in my mind, I was always like, it's probably just a fancy way of saying that he had a genetic deformity, and of course they wouldn't know what that was back then, and so he was considered a giant, because you can be, I think the tallest man in the world was something like 8 feet tall whenever he died. And most people that have acromegalia, it's often a tumor on your pituitary gland, which makes you continue to grow throughout your whole life, makes you very sick, because human beings aren't meant to be that tall. It's just a hindrance on your body. And so it's very, very hard to sustain life when you're a giant. And it causes ocular issues. So most likely Goliath was a human being with acromegalia. He was a giant, giganticism, and he probably had vision problems. So he's always, in the story, he's always yelling for David to come down and meet him. And he says it multiple times, and he has a helper with him. And so the people that are analyzing this story and people that have gone through the story, they're, from a historical perspective, most likely think he had a handler that helped him, and he couldn't see, and so he needed David to come down to fight him with hand-to-hand combat. David, obviously, would be clobbered because he was much, much smaller. He was a shepherd. He was considered of a lower class. So he does not come down to meet Goliath. And another point to prove that that Goliath has poor vision is that he says that David has 2 sticks. Goliath says something like, "What are you doing treating me like a dog, bringing your sticks with you?" In actuality, David only had 1 stick that would have been his throwing apparatus. So that again proves that he had probably acromegalia with vision problems. It's not rocket science. These Bible stories, it's often just people had birth defects and we didn't have names for them, and people had unique experiences that we couldn't explain because we didn't have understandings of science yet. So it's often like, of course, but I digress. So in actuality, David most likely does not actually fight Goliath in the traditional sense. He probably throws his stone, and they've done the research with how fast the stone could have been thrown with someone of his abilities, because apparently he was a noted stone thrower, and it would have been the equivalent of a low-level handgun, enough to definitely kill him with a blow to the head, and potentially they said, maybe even knock his head off. So it proves, not proves, because everything that involves these sorts of stories are truly difficult to prove one way or the other, but it shows that most likely the story of David Goliath is, in actuality, a story of an underdog finding an underhanded way to win. He didn't play by the rules, he played by his strengths. And so the whole book is basically about how to use your weaknesses for your own benefit, how to actually have these things work in your favor. And it's been a really I did not do a good job explaining that story, but I just felt like I needed to explain my discoveries of the origins of this story and how it's actually perceived to be according to these historians. Because I think so much of our lives we're told this is what happened, or this is, the thing that everyone just tells, kind of like a game of telephone where we're all told the same story. And so there's no actual comprehension of what happened. It's not you analyzing the story, it's you hearing it and going, oh yeah, that's what happened. And I think that's so much of life. So many of the lore and the stories that have happened in the past probably had much more nuance and much more kind of like meat on their bones. Like, usually it's not as fantastical of a story by way of like a miracle, but it's fantastical in the way of it showing human ingenuity or human strength or courage. It's almost a different kind of admirable and amazing, and really is a testament to how resilient we are as human beings. And so I'm excited to read the rest of the book, and we'll listen to it because this one I'm listening to, and I highly recommend you read the book. Very, very good. And I was also thinking today, and this kind of is a totally different tangent, but it just felt it's something I've felt and thought about for a while. And it became so clear to me earlier today when I was looking to buy dry erase markers online. And that made me think of buying school supplies and how exciting of a time that was in late August, and how fun it was, and how you'd get your folders and everything would match. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm a nerd, maybe it's just me loving school, but school supply season was just the best. It was, oh my God, it was just like the epitome of preparing for life. And it made me think, buying these dry erase markers, why is there such a stark divide between childhood joy and adult misery? Like, what changed? Why can't I get thrilled buying the equivalent of school supplies, adult school supplies for my tasks in my life? Why is it just considered now like a mundane experience? Why don't we have that same excitement in life anymore, just in general? Because I don't know, it just, the feeling today of buying these markers and me feeling excitement about it. I'm like, ooh, I wonder which kind I should get. I wonder what color scheme and part of me said to myself, why are you excited about this? Like, it was the judgmental part of my brain. Like, that's so childish. That's so immature. And that's what kind of sparked that idea that why are things so specifically child versus adult? Why are things marketed like dry erase markers too? Like, some of them were marketed for children. There was no difference. It's just dry erase markers. And obviously I know kids go to school, but why can't adults have that level of joy? Why? I don't know. What is missing with us as human beings where there's this bleakness that comes over being an adult, where there's such a clear line, there's such a clear divide of child, free, fun, finding joy in the simple things, being able to laugh with your friends, be silly, and then boom, line, adult. Suddenly everything is just an endless sea of misery. It's, oh, you're an adult. Suck it up, you're an adult. Life's not supposed to be fun, you're an adult. It's like, we're an adult most of our lives. Don't you think you'd want the back 60% of your life to be fun? 70% instead of the first bit of your life? And then I'd rather have it be reversed. I'd rather have the first bit be trash and then the back, 65-70% be amazing. Call me crazy, but the math ain't math in here. And I always think this too when I see, especially in American culture, I think this is prevalent, where everything's childified. Recently, a lot of pools in my area, like public pools, they'll all have these really elaborate, excessive slides. Like, the indoor pool will have a slide that takes over the whole pool, and then the outdoor pool will have the same. And they remodeled it to be that way. And it just is so crazy to me, because I'm like, instead of making it just be a pool and maybe have one slide at the end that's not a circular slide that takes up the entire area, it becomes this childified space where adults just have to grow up and live in this world that's catered toward children, when it should just be a world that's has things that are friendly for children, but adults should be able to swim in pools and exercise and play soccer in the evenings and do all of these things that are just human beings enjoying their lives. But because we've had this very intense divide where childhood has to be this hyper euphoric, the kids are very overparented. The parents have to focus their whole life on these kids. They don't have a life of their own. It becomes this miserable experience as an adult where you have to slog through this horrible life. And you have to do this horrible job and commute and suffer, when it doesn't have to be this way. We can rearrange our lives. Other countries do it very well. They don't childify their spaces. They have adult spaces, and children live amongst the adults, and the adults still get to enjoy their lives. And there's not as much just suffering for the sake of it. Like, I almost feel like with this like Protestant work ethic that America has been built on, that There's this addiction to suffering because it somehow builds your character as an adult. And, you know, we have that phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, really, like, if you're just trying to enjoy your life, you're almost treated as like a pariah. Like, you're lazy, like, you're gross. If you don't want to have kids or be around kids, you're considered like a freak. Like, oh, you have to do it eventually because you won't have a social circle. It's like, well, maybe that's not a very good reason to have kids. Maybe there needs to be, you know, not just soccer fields where kids play or a pool where just kids swim. Maybe there's other places for adults. Maybe not everything is like childified. Maybe instead of a splash pad for specifically young children, you know, 0 to 5, maybe, you know, have a smaller pool that everybody can use. And don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to parks or slides or, you know, child-centric things at all. But I just don't think it needs to take over the entirety of the adult space. You know, I worry a lot about the future of America because I think that so many people are unable to be their true selves because of this facade of adulthood that we've put on people, where no one can express that they feel lost or alone or confused because they're an adult. You can't be bad at anything because you're an adult. You can't be naive or sweet or childish because you're an adult. We rob ourselves of all of these qualities that make us human and make us vulnerable and make us able to connect with other people because we've been sold this notion of what adulthood is. And the more people I meet and the more people I talk to and the more I connect with myself and feel, more at peace with myself and happier, I realize that it really is just connecting to who you were as a kid before you were influenced by society, before, you know, culture and fitting in kind of stamped you out. And it's really that simple. And also, the more people I meet, I realize that we all are so fragile in a good way. That we're all just kids at heart that just want to hang out and get along and have a good time and eat good food and listen to good music and watch good movies and just hang out with friends. It's really not that deep, bro. Like, it's not that deep. And the more we move toward that, and obviously we have to work and do important things and protect each other, and obviously there's going to be violence and chaos and bad people in the world, because with good comes evil, and with safety comes a lack of safety, and with, you know, this always comes that. We're never going to eradicate the bad, because that's what being alive is you have to have the bad to really relish in the good. But we don't have to make life so hard and sad and so adult all the time. And maybe it's because I'm like an eternal child sometimes and kind of like a Peter Pan. So you might be listening to this and laughing at me and thinking like, oh, dumb idiot girl running her mouth while she's unemployed. Yeah, of course she wants to be like a kid again. Yeah, I see the criticisms and I respect it, and I'm not saying this as shirking responsibilities or avoiding life and what we need to do. I just think life doesn't have to be this miserable and tough, especially because there's the concept of life already being suffering. If you are alive, you are going to suffer because inevitably death will come for you and everybody that you know. And that in itself is suffering. And a lot of antinatalists profess that viewpoints, and I definitely respect that viewpoint, because if you can avoid suffering, of course you'd want to avoid suffering for any potentiality of life that would come through. But I digress. I say this long-winded story that was inspired by dry erase markers to say that I just think that we need to not have such this stark divide between being a child and being an adult. And I don't know if the way we do it in America with having everything be childified, and having kids be so overparented is the way to go. I don't think it's working, and I would think that most people, though they might initially disagree, behind closed doors, I would think that they would say, yeah, something's not working here. I think we need to change things up. I think we need to pursue life being better for kids and life being better for adults. So many people I know, I call it hurry up and die. They did all their tasks and their things they needed to do. They got married, they had kids, and now they feel empty and depressed, and they have trapped themselves into a life that I don't think they're content with. I'm not saying everybody does this. There are a lot of people that really love their existence, but I think most people want more meaning, want more joy, want more freedom, want to feel like their life is something. And I don't think the American version of adulthood makes you feel that your life is something. It makes you feel that you are a cog in a machine in a gray world that doesn't have any, and there's no tunnel with an illumination at the end. It's just you keep slogging along until you die. And I think that is where so much of our crises are coming from. Granted, there's so many other issues, but I think if we really turned adulthood into a more meaningful space, a more existential space, if you will, my classic answer to everything, it would be a better world. And so on that note, I have 3 quotes that kind of go along with the idea of we are both child and adult at once. We are just a unified human being having a human experience on a flawed planet bouncing around in space. So let me find it. I am still every age that I have been. Because I was once a child, I am always a child. Because I was once a searching adolescent, given to moods and ecstasies, these are still part of me, and always will be. This does not mean that I ought to be trapped or enclosed in any of these ages, the delayed adolescent, the childish adult, but that they are in me to be drawn on. To forget is a form of suicide. Far too many people misunderstand what putting away childish things means, and think that forgetting what it is like to think and feel and touch and smell and taste and see and hear like a 3-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 23-year-old means being grown up. When I'm with these people, I, like the kids, feel that if this is what it means to be a grown-up, then I don't ever want to be one. Instead of which, if I can retain a child's awareness and joy and be 51, then I will really learn what it means to be grown up. That's from Madeleine L'Engle. And another quote. I am convinced that most people do not grow up. We find parking spaces and honor our credit cards. We marry and dare to have children and call that growing up. I think what we do is mostly grow old. We carry accumulation of years in our bodies and on our faces, but generally our real selves, the children inside, are still innocent and shy as magnolias. We may act sophisticated and worldly, but I believe we feel safest when we go inside ourselves and find home, a place where we belong, and maybe the only place we really do. That is from the one and only Maya Angelou, from Letter to My Daughter. And finally, I think this sums it up perfectly, from the great Albert Einstein. Do not grow old, no matter how long you live. Never cease to stand like curious children before the great mystery into which we were born. So, on that note, be forever curious, be an eternal child, find joy in the way that you found joy as a kid, be it drawing or painting or making pottery or reading comic books or writing up a play and doing it with your friends. Anything that feels silly is probably a thing you should pursue. If society has laughed and told you you should grow up when you talk about this thing, I've always learned and now realize that's the thing that you should pursue that's going to bring you joy and happiness. And also, don't forget to leave this place better than you found it. And in this case, add a little bit of youthful joy as well. Thanks for listening. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's the Happiest Sad Person Podcast. Feel free to DM me any suggestions, ideas, maybe people that you would want to have on the podcast, because I want to do interviews again and sort of have the solo eps and then interviews and just see where things are going. But right now I'm trying to be accountable, showing up, making videos, making content, making episodes consistently, and then you build habits from there. So thanks again, you guys, for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week. All right, bye.